The morning sun cast golden rays across the cobblestone streets of London. Thousands of tourists gathered outside Buckingham Palace. Among them was Jake Morrison, a 23-year-old social media influencer from California who had flown across the Atlantic with one mission in mind: to create viral content that would skyrocket his follower count. His phone was always in his hand, camera ready, eyes constantly scanning for the next big moment that would make people stop scrolling. Jake had spent the previous night in his cramped hotel room, watching compilation videos of tourists interacting with the Queen's Guard. He laughed at clips of people trying to make the stoic soldiers laugh, pose next to them, or break their concentration. The comments were always the same, praising the guards for their discipline or mocking tourists for their foolish attempts. But Jake wanted something different. He wanted something nobody had done before. His friend Marcus, who had accompanied him on this trip, was more cautious. Marcus was the quieter of the two, preferring to enjoy experiences rather than document every second of them. He had agreed to come along because Jake had promised it would be an adventure, but he was growing increasingly uncomfortable with Jake's obsession with going viral. That morning, as they walked through the crowded streets toward the palace, Marcus noticed Jake was carrying a small water bottle filled with what looked like soda. The palace gates were magnificent, black iron decorated with gold accents that gleamed in the sunlight. Beyond them stood the guards in their iconic red tunics and tall bearskin hats. These weren't actors or performers. They were highly trained soldiers from elite regiments of the British Army, responsible for protecting the royal family and their residences. Each guard stood perfectly still, rifle at their side, eyes fixed straight ahead. Their discipline was legendary, their training rigorous and demanding. Jake pushed through the crowd, positioning himself near one particular guard who stood at his post near the main entrance. The guard was a young man, perhaps in his late 20s, with a strong jawline visible beneath his bearskin cap. His uniform was immaculate, every button polished, every crease sharp. He had been standing there for nearly 45 minutes without moving a single muscle, his breathing so controlled it was barely noticeable. Marcus grabbed Jake's arm. "Whatever you're planning, don't do it. These guys are real soldiers, not street performers." Jake shrugged him off with a grin. "Relax, man. It's just a harmless prank. Everyone does stuff like this. I'm just adding my own twist." He pulled out the water bottle, shaking it slightly. Inside was a mixture of water and blue food coloring that he had prepared specifically for this moment. He had seen videos of tourists pretending to throw things at guards, but he wanted to actually do it. Not with anything harmful, just enough to get a reaction. To capture that split second when the unbreakable composure. The crowd around them was thick with tourists from every corner of the globe. Families took photos, children pointed excitedly at the guards, and elderly couples reminisced about previous visits. Nobody was paying particular attention to Jake and Marcus, which was exactly what Jake wanted. He needed the element of surprise to make this work. Jake started recording on his phone, holding it at chest level to capture everything. He took a few steps closer to the guard, close enough that he could see the tiny beads of sweat forming on the soldier's forehead, despite the cool morning air. The guard's eyes remained fixed forward, not acknowledging Jake's presence even though he was certainly aware of it. These guards were trained to ignore distractions, to remain focused regardless of what happened around them. "Check this out," Jake whispered to his phone camera, a mischievous smile spreading across his face. "About to make history here, guys. Nobody's done this before." Marcus stepped back, distancing himself from what was about to happen. He felt a knot forming in his stomach, a sense that this was going to end badly. But Jake was his friend, and he felt paralyzed, unable to stop what was coming. With a quick motion, Jake squeezed the water bottle, sending a stream of blue liquid directly at the guard's face and uniform. The spray hit the soldier's cheek, running down his jaw and splattering across his pristine red tunic. Droplets hung on his bearskin cap like artificial raindrops. The crowd around them gasped collectively, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. Jake kept his camera running, capturing every second. He expected shouting, maybe someone rushing over to escort him away, perhaps even the guard himself breaking formation. What he didn't expect was what actually happened. The guard didn't move, not even a flinch. The blue liquid dripped down his face, staining his uniform, and yet he remained absolutely still. His eyes stayed fixed straight ahead, his grip on his rifle unchanged, his breathing steady and controlled. It was as if nothing had happened at all, as if he were a statue, incapable of registering the assault on his dignity. The crowd's gasp turned into murmurs of shock and disapproval. People began pointing at Jake, their faces showing disgust and anger. An elderly British woman nearby shook her head, muttering something about shameful Americans. Parents pulled their children away from the scene, not wanting them to witness what they clearly considered an act of profound disrespect. Jake lowered his phone slightly, his smile fading. This wasn't the reaction he had anticipated. He expected laughter from the crowd, maybe some applause for his boldness. Instead, he felt the weight of dozens of eyes judging him, condemning him. Marcus had turned away completely, his face red with embarrassment. Still, the guard hadn't moved. Blue liquid continued to drip from his chin onto his uniform, creating small dark patches on the red fabric. His jaw was clenched tight, the only sign that he was aware of what had happened. But his eyes remained forward, his posture perfect. The level of self-control required to maintain that composure was extraordinary. Far beyond anything Jake had anticipated, a security officer began making his way through the crowd. But before he could reach Jake, something else happened. The guard, still maintaining his forward gaze, did something unexpected. Without turning his head, without breaking his stance, he spoke in a clear, calm voice that carried across the suddenly quiet courtyard. "Sir, you've just committed an assault on a member of Her Majesty's Guard. I suggest you remain where you are." The words were delivered without emotion, without anger, just a simple statement of fact. But they carried a weight that made Jake's blood run cold. This wasn't a performer at a theme park. This was a soldier, a trained military professional who had just been assaulted while on duty. The reality of what Jake had done suddenly crashed down on him like a wave. The crowd parted as two more guards appeared, moving with swift precision toward Jake's position. These weren't the ceremonial guards standing at attention. These were active-duty military police. And their expressions made it clear that this situation was now being taken very seriously. Jake's phone slipped from his hand, clattering on the cobblestones. His viral moment was turning into his worst nightmare. Marcus finally found his voice. "Jake, what have you done?" But it was too late for questions. The guards were there, and Jake Morrison's London adventure was about to take a turn he had never imagined. The two military police officers approached Jake with measured steps, their boots clicking against the cobblestones in perfect rhythm. One was a tall man with sharp features and silver hair visible beneath his cap. The other a younger woman with piercing green eyes that seemed to see right through Jake's false confidence. They weren't running or shouting. They didn't need to. Their presence alone commanded authority. Jake's hands began to shake. The reality of his situation was sinking in deeper with each passing second. This wasn't going to be a funny story he would tell at parties back home. This wasn't content that would make people hit the like button. He had assaulted a soldier on duty, and in Britain, that was a serious criminal offense. His mind raced through possibilities, each one worse than the last. Would he be arrested? Deported? Would this follow him for the rest of his life? The senior officer stopped directly in front of Jake, looking down at him with an expression that mixed disappointment with professional detachment. "Sir, I'm Sergeant Williams of the Metropolitan Police. You need to come with us immediately. Do you understand?" Jake nodded, his throat too dry to speak. He glanced back at the guard he had sprayed, who still stood at attention, blue liquid now drying on his face in uniform in the warming sun. The guard's eyes remained fixed forward, but there was something in his posture now, subtle tension that hadn't been there before. Jake realized with a sickening feeling that this soldier was holding back not just his movement, but likely his anger as well. Marcus stepped forward, his voice pleading. "Officers, please. He's an idiot, but he didn't mean any real harm. It was just water and food coloring. Can't we just apologize and leave?" The female officer turned to Marcus, her expression softening slightly. "I understand your concern for your friend, but this isn't a matter we can simply overlook. Your friend assaulted a serving member of the military while they were performing their duties. This is a criminal offense under British law. We need to process this properly." The crowd had grown larger now, forming a thick circle around the scene. Phones were everywhere, dozens of cameras capturing Jake's humiliation from every angle. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had wanted to go viral, and now he would, just not in the way he had imagined. Tomorrow, he would be the villain in countless news articles and social media posts. The ugly American who disrespected British tradition and military service. As the officers began to escort Jake away, the guard who had been sprayed finally moved. After standing perfectly still for so long, the movement seemed almost mechanical. He turned his head slowly, his eyes finding Jake's for just a moment. There was no anger in those eyes, no hatred. Instead, Jake saw something that hit him even harder: profound disappointment. It was the look a teacher might give a student who had thrown away their potential, or a parent watching their child make a terrible choice. Then the guard spoke again, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "Officers, a moment, please." Sergeant Williams paused, turning back toward the guard with a respectful nod. The guard stepped down from his post, breaking his formal stance for the first time. He approached the group, and Jake noticed details he hadn't seen before. The guard was taller than he had appeared while standing at attention, probably 6 feet 2 inches. His shoulders were broad, his bearing that of someone who had spent years in military service. The blue stains on his uniform stood out starkly against the red fabric, a visible reminder of Jake's foolishness. The guard stopped in front of Jake, looking him directly in the eyes. Up close, Jake could see the young man was probably only a few years older than himself, maybe 27 or 28. He had light brown eyes and a small scar above his left eyebrow that spoke of previous service, perhaps in combat zones. This wasn't just a ceremonial soldier. This was someone who had served his country in real dangerous situations. "What's your name?" the guard asked, his voice calm but firm. Jake Morrison," Jake managed to whisper. "Jake Morrison. I'm Guardsman Thomas Fletcher of the Grenadier Guards. Do you know what that means?" Jake shook his head, unable to speak. Guardsman Fletcher continued, his tone educational rather than angry. "It means I'm part of one of the oldest, most respected regiments in the British Army. We've served in every major conflict for over 300 years. We've fought in world wars, in the Falklands, in Iraq and Afghanistan. Men from my regiment have died protecting people they never met, defending values they believed in. And when we stand guard at these posts, we're not just standing still for tourists to photograph. We're honoring that legacy. We're representing every soldier who came before us and every soldier who will come after." The crowd had gone completely silent. Even the usual sounds of London traffic seemed to fade into the background. Everyone was listening to Guardsman Fletcher's words. Jake felt each sentence like a physical blow. Fletcher gestured to his stained uniform. "You thought this would be funny? You thought making a soldier break his composure would get you attention on the internet. But what you actually did was disrespect 3 centuries of service and sacrifice. You disrespected every person who has worn this uniform, including my grandfather who died in World War II before I was born." Jake's eyes were burning now, tears threatening to spill over. He wanted to disappear, to somehow undo the last 10 minutes of his life. But there was no going back. The damage was done, captured on dozens of cameras, witnessed by hundreds of people. Marcus was crying now, not bothering to hide his tears. He had tried to warn Jake, but his friend hadn't listened. Now they were both standing here, facing the consequences of Jake's arrogance and stupidity. Guardsman Fletcher took a deep breath, and something in his expression shifted. The disappointment was still there, but it was mixed now with something else. Something that looked almost like pity. "Sergeant Williams, may I make a suggestion?" The senior officer raised an eyebrow, clearly curious about where this was going. "Of course, Guardsman Fletcher. What do you propose?" "I don't want to press charges," Fletcher said, his words causing a ripple of surprise through the crowd. "But I don't think this young man should simply walk away either. I think he needs to understand what he's done, really understand it. And I think I know a way to make that happen." Jake looked up, hope flickering in his chest for the first time since this nightmare began. "I'll do anything," he said quickly. "Anything at all. I'm so sorry. I was so stupid. Please, just tell me what I can do to make this right." Fletcher studied him for a long moment, as if weighing Jake's sincerity. Then he nodded slowly. "All right, Jake Morrison. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to spend the next 3 days volunteering at the Royal Hospital Chelsea, helping care for retired soldiers. You're going to hear their stories, learn about their service, understand what it means to wear a uniform. And at the end of those 3 days, you're going to write a genuine apology, not just to me, but to everyone who watched this video and everyone who serves. If you do that, I'll consider the matter settled." Sergeant Williams looked surprised, but nodded slowly. "That's a generous offer, Guardsman Fletcher. Very generous indeed. Mr. Morrison, do you accept these terms?" Jake nodded vigorously, relief flooding through him. Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much." Fletcher held up a hand. "Don't thank me yet. This isn't going to be easy. The men and women at the hospital have seen things you can't imagine. They've sacrificed more than you can comprehend. If you go there with the same attitude you brought here today, they'll see right through you. You need to be genuine. You need to be humble. Can you do that?" Jake met the guardsman's eyes and saw the challenge there. This was a test, perhaps the most important test of his young life. He could choose to see it as just a punishment to endure, or he could choose to actually learn something, to grow from this terrible mistake. The choice was his. "I can do that," Jake said quietly. "I promise I'll do my best." Fletcher extended his hand, and Jake took it, shaking firmly. The guardsman's grip was strong, his palm calloused from years of military training and service. It was the handshake of someone who kept their promises, who followed through on their commitments. Jake understood that he was expected to do the same. As the crowd began to disperse, people's expressions had changed. Where there had been anger and disgust, there was now something different. Respect for Guardsman Fletcher's handling of the situation, and perhaps a small hope that Jake Morrison might actually learn something from this experience. The viral moment Jake had wanted was happening, but in a completely different way than he had imagined. Marcus put his arm around Jake's shoulders as they walked away with Sergeant Williams to handle the formal paperwork. "You got lucky, man. Really lucky. That guard could have had you arrested and deported. Instead, he's giving you a chance to learn something." Jake nodded, looking back one last time at Guardsman Fletcher, who had returned to his post and resumed his position of attention. Despite the blue stains still visible on his uniform, the guard stood tall and proud, his dignity intact. He had turned a moment of disrespect into a lesson in grace, discipline, and second chances. "I know," Jake whispered. "I'm not going to waste it." The Royal Hospital Chelsea stood like a monument to history in the heart of London, its red brick buildings dating back to the 17th century. As Jake and Marcus approached the main entrance the following morning, Jake felt his stomach twist with nervousness. This was nothing like the tourist attractions he had planned to visit. This was real, and the weight of what he was about to experience pressed down on him with every step. Sergeant Williams had arranged everything. The previous evening after, hours of paperwork and serious conversations about responsibility and consequences. Jake's passport had been temporarily held by the authorities, ensuring he would complete his commitment before being allowed to leave the country. The story of what happened at Buckingham Palace had already spread across social media. Jake's phone had been flooded with messages ranging from supportive to absolutely brutal. He had turned it off that morning, unable to face another notification. A woman in her 50s met them at the entrance. She wore a simple blue uniform with a name tag that read Margaret Walsh, Volunteer Coordinator. Her face was kind, but her eyes were sharp, assessing Jake in a single glance. She had clearly been briefed on the situation. "Mr. Morrison, I presume," she said, extending her hand. Her handshake was firm and professional. "I'm Margaret. I'll be supervising your time here. Before we begin, I need you to understand something very clearly. The men and women in this hospital are heroes. They've served in conflicts around the world, many of them suffering injuries both physical and psychological. They deserve your utmost respect and genuine effort. Are we clear?" "Yes, ma'am," Jake replied, his voice steadier than he felt. "I understand. I want to do this right." Margaret studied him for another moment before nodding. Good. Your friend can wait in the visitors area. You'll be working in several areas over the next 3 days, starting with the common rooms where our residents spend much of their time. You'll help serve meals, assist with daily activities, and most importantly, you'll listen. These men have stories to tell, and if you're smart, you'll pay attention. Marcus squeezed Jake's shoulder before heading to the waiting area. Jake followed Margaret through corridors lined with photographs spanning centuries of military service. Black and white images of young soldiers from world wars gave way to color photographs from more recent conflicts. Each face told a story of courage, sacrifice, and service. Jake felt smaller with each step, his own concerns and ambitions seeming trivial in comparison. The common room was spacious and filled with morning light streaming through tall windows. About 20 elderly men in distinctive scarlet coats sat in various clusters. Some reading newspapers, others engaged in conversation, a few watching a morning news program on television. These were the Chelsea pensioners, retired soldiers who had made this hospital their home. Most were in their 80s and 90s, veterans of conflicts Jake had only read about in history books. Margaret led him to a man sitting alone near a window, staring out at the garden beyond. He was thin and weathered, his face marked with deep lines that spoke of a long, hard life. His scarlet coat was immaculate, brass buttons polished to perfection. He held a walking cane carved with intricate designs. "William, this is Jake. He'll be helping out for the next few days," Margaret said gently. "Jake, this is William Patterson. He served in Korea and later in Aden." William turned his blue eyes to Jake, and for a moment, Jake saw a sharpness there that age hadn't diminished. "Helping out, is that what we're calling it?" William's voice was rough, but not unkind. "Margaret told me about you, boy. About what you did to that guard yesterday. Saw it on the news this morning, too. Half the country's talking about it." Jake felt his face burn with shame. "Yes, sir. I made a terrible mistake. I'm here to try to understand why it was wrong and to make amends if I can." William regarded him silently for a long moment, then gestured to the empty chair beside him. "Sit down, then. If you're going to understand anything, you need to hear some stories. Real stories, not the nonsense you see in films or on your social media." Jake sat and Margaret gave him an encouraging nod before moving away to attend to other duties. The room continued its gentle hum of activity around them, but Jake's focus was entirely on William now. "I was 19 when I went to Korea," William began, his eyes growing distant. "Just a boy, really, not much younger than you are now. Thought I knew everything. Thought war would be an adventure. The reality was different. The reality was frozen ground so hard, we couldn't dig proper trenches. It was watching friends die in the snow, their bodies too frozen to bury properly. It was holding the line when everything in you screamed to run, because you knew the men beside you were counting on you." Jake listened, not interrupting, barely breathing. William's words painted pictures that no film could capture, described feelings that no book could properly convey. "I saw my best mate Tommy killed right in front of me," William continued, his voice dropping lower. "Shrapnel from a mortar. He was laughing about a letter from his girl back home one second and gone the next. Just 20 years old. Never got to marry that girl. Never had the children he talked about. Never got to live the life he deserved." A tear rolled down William's weathered cheek, and he didn't bother to wipe it away. "That's what that uniform represents, boy. It represents Tommy and thousands like him who never came home. When you dishonored that guard yesterday, you dishonored their memory. You spat on their sacrifice." The words hit Jake like physical blows. His own eyes were watering now, and he didn't try to hide it. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I didn't think. I just wanted attention. Wanted people to notice me." William turned to look at him directly. "And did you get what you wanted? Is this the attention you were hoping for?" Jake shook his head, unable to speak. "Good," William said, his voice softening slightly. "Then maybe you're not completely beyond hope. The question is, what are you going to do with this lesson? Are you going to feel sorry for yourself? Or are you going to actually change?" Before Jake could answer, another pensioner approached their corner. This man was shorter and rounder than William. with a face that seemed naturally inclined toward, smiling despite the military bearing he still carried. His name tag read Robert Hughes. "Don't let old William scare you too much," Robert said with a chuckle. "He's right about everything he said, mind you, but he forgets to mention that we were all young and stupid once." "One certainly was. Did more than my share of foolish things before the army straightened me out." William snorted. "You did foolish things during your service too, as I recall. Remember that incident in Cyprus with the goat?" Robert laughed, a genuine belly laugh that made several other pensioners look over with smiles of their own. "We don't talk about the goat, William. That story died with our commanding officer. God rest his soul." Despite everything, Jake felt a small smile tugging at his lips. These men had seen terrible things, suffered through experiences he couldn't imagine. And yet they could still laugh, still find joy in memories and friendships. There was a resilience there, a strength that went beyond physical toughness. Over the next several hours, Jake met more of the residents. There was James, who had served in the Falklands and walked with a prosthetic leg after stepping on a mine. There was Arthur, former pilot who had been shot down over Germany in World War II and spent 3 years as a prisoner of war. There was David, who had served in Northern Ireland during the Troubles, and still had nightmares about a bomb that killed 2 of his patrol members. Each man had a story, and each story added another layer to Jake's understanding of what military service truly meant. These weren't action heroes from movies. They were real people who had faced real horrors, made real sacrifices, and carried real scars, both visible and invisible. The uniform that Guardsman Fletcher wore, the position he held at Buckingham Palace, represented all of them and millions more throughout history. During lunch service, Jake helped distribute meals to the pensioners, ensuring each man had everything he needed. Some of them were frail, requiring assistance to cut their food or steady their cups. Jake found himself moving carefully, attentively, treating each person with a care and respect he had never quite shown anyone before. He was learning not just about military service, but about dignity, about honoring those who had given so much. As the afternoon wore on, William called Jake back to his chair by the window. The old soldier's expression was thoughtful, less harsh than it had been that morning. "You've done well today," William said quietly. "I've been watching you, and I can see you're actually listening, actually trying to understand. That's more than I expected, I'll be honest." "Thank you, sir," Jake replied. "I'm trying. Everyone here has been so patient with me, so willing to share their experiences. I don't deserve it, but I'm grateful." William nodded slowly. "You know what I think? I think you're a decent lad who made a very bad choice. The difference between decent people and poor ones isn't that decent people never make mistakes. It's that they learn from them and do better. The question is, are you going to do better?" Jake thought about that question, really thought about it. 2 days ago, his biggest concern had been follower counts and viral videos. He had measured his worth in likes and comments, in momentary attention that meant nothing. Now, sitting in this room filled with men who had actually accomplished meaningful things, who had actually made a difference in the world, his previous priorities seemed hollow and empty. "I want to do better," Jake said finally. "I want to be someone worth respecting. I don't know exactly how yet, but I know I can't go back to the person I was before. That person was shallow and selfish and didn't understand what really matters." William smiled, the first genuine smile Jake had seen from him all day. "That's a good start, boy. A very good start indeed. Now, let me tell you about the time I served with a young sergeant who reminds me a bit of your Guardsman Fletcher. He was a remarkable man, and his story might help you understand even more about the kind of person who wears that uniform." As William began another story, Jake settled in to listen, truly listen, in a way he never had before. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, and in that quiet room filled with history and memory, Jake Morrison began the real work of becoming a better man. 3 days had passed, and Jake Morrison stood outside Buckingham Palace once again. But this time, everything was different. He wasn't holding his phone, searching for the perfect angle to capture viral content. He wasn't scanning the crowd for opportunities to make a scene. Instead, he stood quietly, respectfully, watching the changing of the guard ceremony with new eyes that finally understood what they were seeing. Marcus stood beside him, noticing the change in his friend. Over the past 72 hours, he had watched Jake transform. The cocky, attention-seeking influencer had been replaced by someone quieter, more thoughtful, more aware of the world beyond his screen. The conversations they had each evening after Jake's volunteer work had been different too. Less about social media strategies and more about meaning, purpose, and responsibility. The ceremony was magnificent. Guards in their scarlet tunics and bearskin caps marched with perfect precision, their movements synchronized after countless hours of practice. The crowd watched with appreciation, but Jake saw something more now. He saw William Patterson frozen in the snow of Korea. He saw James struggling with his prosthetic leg after stepping on a mine. He saw Arthur spending 3 years as a prisoner of war, holding on to hope through unimaginable circumstances. He saw David haunted by memories of friends lost to violence in Northern Ireland. Every guard on that parade ground represented that legacy, carried that weight, honored that sacrifice. They weren't just standing still for tourists. They were living monuments to something greater than themselves. After the ceremony concluded, Jake approached one of the palace officials, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes who had been expecting him. Margaret Walsh had arranged this meeting as the final part of Jake's commitment. The official led Jake and Marcus through a side entrance, through corridors Jake had never seen, to a small meeting room where Guardsman Thomas Fletcher waited in his dress uniform. Fletcher stood as they entered, and Jake was struck again by the man's bearing, his quiet dignity. The guardsman's uniform was spotless, showing no trace of the blue stain from 3 days ago. He had probably worn a different tunic that day and every day since. But Jake knew the memory of that stain would stay with both of them far longer than any physical mark. "Mr. Morrison," Fletcher said, extending his hand. "Please, sit down." They settled into chairs around a small table, and Jake pulled out several handwritten pages from his jacket pocket. His hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what he was about to share. Over the past 3 evenings, after his work at the Royal Hospital, Chelsea, he had written and rewritten his apology, trying to find words that were genuine, that captured what he had learned. "Before I read this," Jake began, his voice steady despite his nerves, "I want to thank you. What you did that day, offering me a chance to learn instead of just punishing me, that was one of the most generous things anyone has ever done for me. You could have had me arrested, deported, banned from the country. Instead, you gave me an education I'll carry for the rest of my life." Fletcher nodded but didn't interrupt, waiting for Jake to continue. Jake unfolded the pages and began to read. "My name is Jake Morrison. And 3 days ago, I committed an act of profound disrespect against Guardsman Thomas Fletcher of the Grenadier Guards. I sprayed him with colored water while he was on duty at Buckingham Palace. I was thinking it would be funny, thinking it would make me famous on social media. I was wrong in ways I didn't even understand at the time." His voice grew stronger as he continued. "Over the past 3 days, I've had the privilege of meeting veterans at the Royal Hospital, Chelsea. I met William Patterson, who served in Korea and watched his best friend die in the frozen ground. I met James Hughes, who lost his leg to a landmine in the Falklands, but still serves his community every day. I met Arthur Brown, who survived 3 years as a prisoner of war and never lost his dignity or his hope. I met David Thompson, who carries invisible scars from his service in Northern Ireland." Jake looked up from the paper, meeting Fletcher's eyes directly. "These men taught me that when I disrespected you, I wasn't just pranking one soldier. I was disrespecting every person who has worn a British military uniform, everyone who has served and sacrificed, everyone who has given their time, their health, sometimes their lives for something greater than themselves. I was disrespecting William's friend Tommy, who died at 20 years old in the snow. I was disrespecting James's 2 patrol members who were killed by that bomb. I was disrespecting Arthur and every prisoner of war who endured torture and deprivation. I was disrespecting your grandfather who died in World War II." Tears were rolling down Jake's cheeks now, but he didn't wipe them away. This wasn't a performance. This was real, perhaps the most real moment of his entire life. "I thought I wanted to be famous, to be noticed, to matter," he continued. "But I was looking for those things in all the wrong ways. The men I met this week, they matter. They've done things that actually count, that actually made a difference in the world. Meanwhile, I was chasing likes and followers, measuring my worth in numbers that meant nothing. He looked back down at his paper. I'm writing this apology not just to Guardsman Fletcher, but to everyone who has served in the British Armed Forces past and present. I'm writing to the families who have lost loved ones in service. I'm writing to every person who watched that video and felt the pain of seeing military service disrespected. I was wrong. I was ignorant. I was selfish. And I am deeply, profoundly sorry. The room was silent for a long moment after Jake finished reading. Fletcher sat quietly, his hands folded on the table, his expression thoughtful. Finally, he spoke. Thank you for that apology, Jake. I can tell it's genuine, and I appreciate the work you've put into understanding what happened and why it mattered. He leaned forward slightly. The question now is, what comes next? Saying sorry is important, but it's what you do after the apology that really matters. Jake nodded, having anticipated this question. I've been thinking about that a lot. I'm deleting my social media accounts when I get back to California. Not because I think social media is inherently bad, but because I need to figure out who I am without the constant need for validation from strangers. I need to find a way to contribute something meaningful, instead of just seeking attention. Marcus spoke up for the first time. He's also been talking about volunteering with veterans organizations back home. There are a lot of programs that need help, and after this week, Jake wants to give something back. Fletcher smiled, a genuine warm smile that transformed his face. That's excellent. Veterans organizations always need dedicated volunteers, and having experienced the Royal Hospital Chelsea, you'll understand the kind of care and respect these men and women deserve. He stood, and Jake and Marcus rose with him. Fletcher extended his hand again, and this time when Jake shook it, it felt different. It felt like an acknowledgement between equals. Between two people who understood something important about dignity, respect, and second chances. You made a mistake, Jake, Fletcher said. A serious one. But you've handled the consequences with grace and genuine effort to learn. That says something about your character. Don't waste this lesson. Use it to become the person you're capable of being. I will, Jake promised. I absolutely will. As they walked back through the palace corridors toward the exit, Jake felt lighter somehow, as if a weight he hadn't known he was carrying had been lifted. The viral fame he had sought so desperately no longer seemed appealing. The hollow validation of strangers online no longer seemed worth pursuing. Instead, he felt something new, a sense of purpose, of direction, understanding what actually mattered. Outside the palace, the afternoon sun painted the buildings in gold and shadow. Tourists continued to take photos, children continued to point excitedly at the guards, and life went on as it always did. But for Jake Morrison, everything had changed. His phone buzzed in his pocket, probably another notification about the incident that had gone viral in all the wrong ways. Instead of checking it, he pulled it out and powered it down completely. There would be time later to deal with social media, to respond to messages, to figure out his digital presence. But right now, he wanted to be fully present in this moment. To appreciate the lesson he had learned and the chance he had been given. You okay? Marcus asked, noticing the gesture. Jake nodded, a real smile crossing his face. Yeah, I'm actually better than okay. I know this whole thing started as a nightmare, and in a lot of ways it was. But Guardsman Fletcher gave me something incredibly valuable. He gave me a chance to grow up, to understand something real about service and sacrifice, and what it means to be a decent human being. They started walking back toward their hotel, leaving Buckingham Palace behind. Jake glanced back one more time at the guards standing at their posts, seeing them now not as props for tourist photos, but as real people doing a real job with real meaning. He thought about William Patterson, who had become something of a mentor over those 3 days, and about the other pensioners who had shared their stories and their wisdom. With a foolish young man who desperately needed both, a week later, back in California, Jake stood in front of his laptop, preparing to upload one final video to his social media accounts before deleting them. In it, he told the complete story of what had happened in London, holding nothing back. He explained his foolish prank, the consequences he faced, and the education he received at the Royal Hospital, Chelsea. He shared what he had learned about military service, about sacrifice, about what really matters in life. He ended the video with a simple message. I thought I wanted to be famous. What I actually needed was to be humble. I thought I wanted attention. What I actually needed was perspective. I'm sharing this story not to excuse what I did, but to show that even serious mistakes can become opportunities to learn and grow. If someone is willing to give you a chance, and you're willing to do the work. Thank you to Guardsman Thomas Fletcher for giving me that chance. Thank you to the Chelsea pensioners for teaching me what service really means. And to anyone watching this, please learn from my mistake without having to make it yourself. Respect matters. Service matters. And who you are when no one is watching matters most of all. The video went viral, just as his original prank video had, but this time the response was different. People shared stories of their own mistakes and lessons learned. Veterans reached out to thank him for sharing the pensioners' stories. Young people reconsidered their own pursuit of social media fame. Teachers used the video to start conversations about respect and responsibility. Jake kept his promise. He deleted his accounts after that final video and began volunteering with a local veterans organization. He enrolled in community college, uncertain what he wanted to study, but knowing he wanted to do something meaningful with his life. He stayed in touch with William Patterson through letters, the old soldier's wisdom continuing to guide him as he navigated his new path, and sometimes late at night. Jake would think about that moment outside Buckingham Palace when Guardsman Fletcher had the power to ruin his life, but chose instead to change it. He thought about the guards standing at their posts, honoring centuries of service and sacrifice with their discipline and dedication. He thought about William and Tommy in the frozen ground of Korea, about James and his fallen comrades, about Arthur enduring years as a prisoner, about David haunted by memories of violence. He thought about all of them, and he understood finally what it meant to be part of something greater than yourself. Not through seeking attention or chasing fame, but through genuine service, through respect, through the quiet dignity of doing the right thing even when no one is watching. Jake Morrison had set out to create a viral moment that would make him famous. Instead, he had received something far more valuable. He had learned what it truly means to be a man of character. In that lesson, taught by a guardsman who responded to disrespect with grace and wisdom, would stay with him for the rest of his life.